You're joking, said Adeline with controlled seductiveness, despite the fact that what she had said had not really been at all that funny. In fact, it offended him just how terrible the joke was, but a man had his needs. No, honest, said the woman. Pretty, and just like the acolyte from earlier, she had glasses. His already broad smile nearly stretched off of his face into the air. Finally, he would dine. He prayed to the guardian, though he doubted such a prayer as the one he was making would be something the god was likely to answer. Or perhaps it was. Religion was a funny thing, so funny that it made his head hurt if he gave it more than a passing thought without a comfortable buffer of alcohol to keep him safe. Maybe he should pray to the Leviathan for once. Line would get a kick out of that, certainly. You are so hilarious, he said, bringing her closer, though the action stretched his ankle, and he nearly betrayed his act with a wince of pain. You know, we should talk more, but in private. I find this whole atmosphere to be a little disruptive, don't you think? Her eyes sparkled mischievously, and she opened her mouth to respond, though he knew what her answer would be. Before she could respond, however, strong hands appeared from his peripheral. The bond between him and the alluring stranger cleaved and replaced by a very impatient-looking man. The woman flashed a dagger that she had not been holding a second before. Who in the abyss are you? You think you can just touch me and... She broke off, gulping as the newcomer stared in her direction. The knife fled from sight, back into whatever crevice she had summoned it from, and she lowered her eyes and meekly said, I'll just take my leave then. This is becoming some sort of cosmic running gag, and I'm not liking it, Adeline thought sourly, seeing another catch flop out of his hands back into the sea. Though he was impressed by the man's ability to frighten someone off with a stern look, he was rightfully distressed by the interruption to his process. Do you prefer the company of men, Vern? The black eye frowned, somehow not understanding his meaning. I have no real preference, but many of my friends have been men, so... No, man. I'm asking, are you gay? The black eye stiffened. Of course not. It's fine if you are, he said soothingly, trying not to laugh. It's not a crime. Some of the fiercest men I've ever fought alongside fancy a sausage in their free time. Not any man's place to judge another man's predilections. Why, I once feigned to love another man so that he'd protect me in a tide, and Adeline's eyes misted up at the memory. Guardian rest his soul. He was good to me, he was. He found himself floating, and he spread his arms out to balance himself in the air as he did so. The black eye, Vern, holding him by the collar, his eyes afire. You told me we would come here to speak of what we must do, not tarry around here with these tavern wenches and delinquents. My mother was a tavern wench, Sir Guardsman, he said, bringing an arm back and ramming it into Vern's stomach. He wasn't much surprised to see it had no effect beyond making him yell in pain, and his new friend merely gave him a confused look. You could not have seriously believed that would work, he stated, not asked, letting him free, and the world bounced slightly as he touched the ground once more. He shook his wrist, mouthing, Ow, to himself silently. The man was every bit of the ebony guard made flesh, it seemed. I like to discover things for myself. It's the scientific approach to life. Vern narrowed his eyes. Is this another one of your poor jests? We need to discuss this, he said seriously, and the man's attention was caught fast, so tightly focused on him that Adeline almost felt a pang of sympathy for him. Your diction, your archaic manner of speaking. I can't consort with someone who so freely uses the word tarry in casual conversation. The man only blinked once, just once. Adeline had never seen someone blink so totally, so singularly before. His eyelashes were the hands of gods, clapping with such finality that their movements stole sound from the world around them. It is vital to your health that your next words please me, vagrant, said the black eye slowly, his face bereft of emotion, though a lone, prominent vein on his temple betrayed his feelings. All right, said Adeline, patting the man on the shoulder, though his wrist was curiously stolen from him, squeezed harshly so that it pulsed and throbbed, and he forced a smile and said, "Why don't we take a seat?" He led the way, his wrist aflame, and he thought of going to the table that he and the others had claimed, Lightning sitting alone, of course, scowling at everyone who came near, but a more interesting option called to him. He diverted course abruptly, weaving through the crowd, Vern cursing behind him, although his cursing was much too polite. Instead, he made his way to a table of men dressed in black silk robes that lay still, their heads bald and eyes focused on him, though their bodies tensed as he neared, and he saw their eyes move past him in confusion, and their bodies went rigid. He smiled, despite the pain in his ankle and wrist. He grabbed a chair from a nearby table and drug it over, then threw himself with a sigh into the seat, sitting at the gathering poultice. He felt Vern standing behind him, and he waited. Go. They moved slowly, but no one defied the Ebony Guard. Not even them. They had the goal to stand off against the wall for a time as Vern took a seat as well, but he turned slowly in his seat towards them, and they were gone before he even managed to look at them. Thanks for that, he said, giving the black eye a grateful nod. They annoy the bejiggins out of me. The man nodded, and silence stole over them, the raucous sounds of the tavern filling it obligingly. Adeline waited patiently, though he was a little cross at the man's temerity. Vernon crossed his arms and spread them out questioningly, then said, What are you looking at me like that for? Aren't you going to ask me what a bejiggins is? I don't care, said Vern through gritted teeth. Adeline waved a hand at the rude comment. I'll let that one slide. Guardian, save me from this fool, said Vern, dragging a hand down his face. So, what is your definition of life-threatening, Sir Guard? Asked Adeline, bemused. Are the cultists, the tides, and sexual frustration not enough to kill me? The man was silent for a moment, frowning. Why do the cultists want you? Besides my dashing good looks, Leviathan knows, he said, and the fact that the idiom was quite literal in this case brought him some small amount of dark mirth. It was his turn to frown, however. You mean, you don't know? No, I don't know much, he said, his words notably bitter. Well, some savor you are. What exactly is your mission here, Sir Vern? I'm not a knight, he snapped. Guardsman Vern, or first recruit Vern, you can call me. Yes, well, Sir Vern is much shorter. I am to keep you alive, said Sir Vern, ignoring the comment. Though I confess the direction I was given is not much more specific than that. Well, let's combine what we know then. From there we can, figure out how in the left eye of a gobbler you're going to accomplish your task. Now, here's what I know, he said. He cleared his throat and went rigid, letting his bleached blonde hair drop down around his face, covering his eyes, affecting an austere aura. Again, he sensed the black eyes' attention upon him, although there was the clear feel of confusion scattered among the atmosphere. Somehow, he managed not to snicker, smile, or chortle as he said, They started hunting me a few years ago. It was a depressingly average day. He wondered if that had any deeper meaning, if everyone who lost someone close to them assigned value where there was none to mundane, ordinary days like this, simply because to them it was important. He hated that he was acting like this. This wasn't him. Introspective. Mother would be so disappointed in me, he said, smiling, yawning, then stretching. She had always hated intellectuals. I hate smart men, she said, pinching his cheek as he ate, smiling at him and scowling at her memories. They remind me of your father. A smart man can't be trusted. He knows too much. He knelt and stabbed his favorite dagger down into the space between her headstone and the small pit she had been buried in, marking 4 of them now. Well, it's a good one, Mother. Hope you like it. It was the 10th anniversary of her passing, and he still missed her. Death was normal in Sidroffen. He hadn't cried yet, and he knew he likely never would. He only wished that he had been at her side at the end. She had taken the rite of sacrifice for him. He had been feverish at the onset of a flood, and he was sent back into the city proper as a result. She, and hundreds of others, had died, of course. Surviving floods was something only cowards could manage, and his mother was the antithesis of that. For her glorious death, the details of which he had never learned, for her body had been unrecognizable, torn to bits and pieces and half eaten, half dissolved by gobbler acid, she had earned the right to be interred here, in this quiet place. Others stood around him at varying distances, mourning as they liked. Most Sidroffans chose to be cremated, space a rather pressing issue for their people, and certainly that had been his mother's wishes, but instead, they had placed her here. Well, the parts of her they had managed to string together, at least. In most days, it didn't bother him, the injustice of her death. What did it matter? She was safe now, waiting for him in the flow, sheltered by the guardian, he was sure. He wasn't really all that fond of religion, being a practical person, and knowing that while gods existed, they certainly didn't give one gobbler's ass about him. His mother, however, was one of the few Sidroffans who still devoutly believed in the guardian, and the curious mythology of it all. He had never asked her why she believed. He felt she deserved the right to keep on undisturbed, because it made her happy. That was what was most important to him. The wind blew, not gently, or not really in any way that he could detect a notable difference from typical winds. He sighed. There he went again, trying to find meaning. Looked around again, glancing at the other sad sacks. There wasn't a teary-eyed one among them, not that he could see. That did put a smile on his face. He turned to walk back home and rest before he went out to drink for the night. Lionel was likely wondering what was taking him so long. He had his own short term coming up, and he wanted to enjoy the amenities of the city while he still could. Turning, however, he nearly stumbled into the chest of a large, dark-skinned man wrapped in an even darker cloak. His expression dour, yet his hair was bleached blonde and clipped tight, like a Sidroffan. Almost like... Gren? What? He said, fiddling around in his pockets. He sighed and placed a wary hand on his brother's shoulder. Look, before you ask, I'm broke. So if there's some sort of business you need money to start, there's no point. Your humor has worsened with age, Adelaine, said Gren, unsmiling, as has your guard. Guard? We've not sparred in a good long while. Quite good now. Probably landed a few blows on you, he said, smiling broadly. He hadn't seen his brother in almost as long a time as his mother. He had appeared shortly after his mother's death, training him in the stead of their father. You know, I always wondered, and now, looking at you again, father had a wide variety of tastes, didn't he? Grant scowled at him. I'm not your real brother, Adelaine. I would have thought that realization would have came with age. I see you've inherited none of your father's wisdom. I know, he said lightly, though his correct assessment brought him no mirth. Not even a half-brother. What are you, some sort of henchman? What was the point? You could have just let me die in the streets. My life means nothing, in the end. His not-so-much-a-brother shook his head and said, Fool, would your father waste his time on something that had no purpose? You have use, Adelaine. You have great use. Ah, the life of a tool, he said, turning back to his mother's grave. She had been one too. just a tool to give birth to another tool. He clenched his fists until the nails drew blood. It is not so bad a life as you may think, said Gren quietly. Adelaine turned back around, searching the man's eyes. I am more than a tool, Gren. I'm nobody's slave. You can tell Father that yourself. Whatever he wants, I'll do the opposite. Always. Rendell sighed, giving him a strange look. You always did that anyways. He smiled. It's my specialty. His former brother pointed to one of the men grieving around them, dressed in a fine black robe, head frightfully bare of hair. One. He pointed to another, then another, and another, increasing the count each time. Adeline had noticed that they were strangely similar looking, but he hadn't really given it much thought beyond that. Then he noticed the fang on their cuffs. Cultists, and they're here for you, said Gren, unconcerned. His eyebrows soared to the top of his temple. What? Why? I haven't done anything to antagonize them. He paused for a moment and thought, well, at least I'm pretty sure I haven't. Do you still have the box? Asked Gren. Adeline retrieved it from his pockets. Is it finally time to open it? He asked, fingers stretching to unfasten the lock. Rendale's hands moved swiftly, enclosing his tightly. No. That time is still yet to come. What do they want me for, then? He looked down at the box and nearly hissed. Is it this damned box? Is Father using me as bait for them? Gren snorted. Please. He has no need to bait anyone. He could destroy the lot of them if he but cared to expend the energy to do so. That only answered part of my question, he said. A flicker of uncertainty passed within his brother's eyes. I know not, said Gren, shrugging, and if Adeline hadn't noticed his tale beforehand, he might have believed him. All I can say is that it is in your best interest to avoid being caught. You really won't tell me much more than that, will you? Even though you know exactly what they want me for. Rendell smiled, though there was no warmth in it. I have given you a chance, Adeline. Be glad of it. Some are never offered such a privilege. His brother turned away and walked from the cemetery. He drew his sword from its sheath and eyed the cultists, turning in a circle slowly. They had abandoned pretense and now began to stalk towards him, whispering something inaudible. He read their lips, though, and the unheard words chilled him. For the glory of Lord Saren. Obviously, I won, he said, flipping his knife in the air casually, still a bit lost in the memories. And that's all you know? Vern asked, sounding defeated. That's all you got from my heart-wrenching tale? No comment on the vague brother figure? No sympathy for my mother's untimely demise? Not interested, said Vern, and then he frowned, turning his eyes accusingly towards Adeline. You could have simply told me you didn't know anything rather than make me endure all that. Well, what's your story? How did the esteemed first recruit end up helping the handsome, vagrant swashbuckler adventurer extraordinaire? Vern's face didn't change, which is to say he retained his charming frown. I don't have a story. I do my duty. That's it. No, he insisted. I told you my backstory, and now you have to reveal yours. We're at a tavern, for Guardian's sake. That's what these things are made for. No, I'm not going to do that, said Vern, and Adeline began to hum A Sword and Shard, one of the most popular bar songs in Sidrufton. Vern's frown morphed into his other expression, the scowl. No amount of makeshift barding will make me tell you anything. Just give up. The forest was as quiet as it was dark, and truly, the place seemed to embody the void into which it led. Without the enchanted light crystals, called ELCs by most, it would be impossible to see anything, even with the supernatural vision granted by the helmets. The darkness surrounding Mount Saren and, by extension, the Black Forest was unnatural, a byproduct of being so near the physical avatar of the Dark God. It was not unnerving, it was fear incarnate, and they stood within the heart of it. His squad of guardsmen was 6 large and, for the most part, competent. As first recruit, it was his duty to instruct and lead them to successful completion of the mission. They had already managed to destroy 3 broodmothers, though it was disconcerting to realize that they had perhaps another 3 to go, rather than the one he had originally assumed was left. He looked at the others, wordlessly issuing instructions, they responding in turn. The land began to climb slightly as they neared the tree base of the mountain, and footing was difficult. Beyond that, one had to carefully watch their feet for holes or smaller abyssal fiends that might alert the more mature creatures of their approach. Vern gave the signal for a wedge formation, seeing that they were closing in on the 4th broodmother site. He took point, Carlias to his left, and Filion, a broad-shouldered and bald man his age, to his right. They passed through a stalwart cluster of trees into a clearing, like they had 3 times previously. The broodmother hung suspended in the air, 2 thick webs keeping it aloft within a network of other smaller webs that supported them. Exhaustion beat upon the layer of earth holding it back. No doubt the others felt the same, though none of them showed a hint of it. He took a deep breath, careful not to make sound, and stepped forward into the clearing. Something was profoundly wrong. Nothing happened. With all the others, and indeed, in all the lectures they had sat through, this was the exact opposite of what was supposed to happen. A broodmother's sight was protected by a fine mist of saturated chlorinium, which was polarized, while the trees constantly produced a stream of nitrous gas that was non-polarized, his instructions had said. He did not fully understand the science behind it all, but he knew the effect this caused the mist to cling to the area around the broodmother, and when anything carrying trace amounts of nitrogen from the trees passed into the broodmother's domain, it made a sound of a frequency indiscernible to the human ear, but clearly audible to the fiend, alerting her to their presence. The creature did not stir. It merely hung there, its gangly appendages swaying freely. The broodmother itself was a revolting creature, constructed, as the name suggested, for the sole purpose of producing as many fiends as possible. As a result, it was a fascinating, dysmorphic creature with an incalculable number of eyes across its thick epidermis, boasting an unsettling thin triple pair of arms with a lower body that ended in a colloid-filled, bulbous lumen that was said to be intensely hot, measuring in the hundreds of degrees. And it was within that sac there fluxed from it a partially solid glop that was activated by the mist, forming an abyssal fiend of which the nature was, from their studies, entirely random. "I don't understand," he murmured, his mind whirring to decipher the riddle presented before him. "This is not—" None of the others stood with him in the clearing. "Ebony Guard! Move forward now!" he hissed. They did stir then, drawing their blades, only he ducked as Carlia's blade nearly decapitated him, flipping backwards and landing into a cascade of handstands and somersaults, and as he did so the world around him seemed to melt and slough off itself, though he did not linger upon the observation. He had been lured into a trap. That was what he knew and what mattered. The rest he could worry about when he was safe. 2 other recruits, Danson and Limian, flew at him from above, and he stepped forward to the small gap between them just before they landed, dropping his weapon and grabbing both of them by their armor, then spinning and throwing them towards Carlia, who batted them away in annoyance. Reality shimmered for a moment before resolving to the same open clearing, just before a gobbler nearly bowled into him, and he hopped over it, ripping its belly open and kicking it towards the others of the squad in one motion. It skipped across the ground like a ball, spilling acid everywhere. He heard the spine-crawling sound of a shadow stalker howling in the distance, then another claiming him as their prey. "Ignore the fiends!" yelled Carlia as some of the group began to fight some of the approaching creatures. "We'll be fighting a damn tide before too long. Kill Stedlin and let's be away from here." So they never intended to kill all the broodmothers. What was the point? The tribunal would discover their failure and they would be executed. Familiar lines, barred from entry into the Ebony Guard for 100 years. They knew he would never agree, of course, but still, this was beyond foolish. It was desperate. He heard the unmistakable sound of reality ripping apart, A sound like glass splintering and cracking overlaid upon paper ripping, and he sprung to his right before the portal appeared, crumbling the ground in where he had previously stood. A rift slammer rose out of it, spikes shining, its eyes glowing molten red in fierce hatred. He took a calming breath. There were things out of his control here. He simply needed to do what he could, and the rest did not matter. The Shadow Stalkers would be here soon, and could attack from quite literally anywhere. He heard the familiar sound of a horde of gobblers hopping feverishly towards them, and he saw a few drip hounds on the fringe of the clearing watching curiously. The situation was dire, but not unrecoverable. Each threat dealt with separately, decisively. He could escape. He flicked the Serrator switch on, the blades roaring to life, humming in anticipation of the flesh it would tear this day. And only he could hear the words that he said next. Even still, I remain. Obviously, I won, said Vern, completely straight-faced, and it was Adelaine's turn to frown, displeasure flowing through him. You finally get to an exciting scene, and you choose to end your story there? You're a tricksy one, Sir Black Eye, said Adelaine. Perhaps if you did not displease me so frequently, I would be more inclined to entertain you, the guard said, grinding his teeth. It's fine, said Adelaine, waving a hand unconcernedly. I doubt you would have executed well. Your perspective is too flat, too matter-of-fact. Where's the emotion? Show me what you're feeling. Don't tell. We don't like that. Well, did you gain anything? Discover something I haven't? Asked Vern. Adeline had, though he knew if he revealed that, it would invariably lead to something he dreaded. Work. Yes, he said in resignation. Starting to make a bit of sense, at least. Well? I've been thinking. I encountered a man previously as well that led me to understanding things more. He said I had been chosen for a great honor. You say House Larian is involved in this as well? Vern nodded in affirmation. Then that settles it. So, here's what we have. I'm wanted, as is of course natural, by many people. Why? Well, for an honor bestowed upon me by the generous Dark God of the Mountain. You know, when it comes to cults, generally speaking, honors are not very healthy, I have noted, for those who receive them. Often, it seems to involve sacrifice, possession, mutilation, torture of some sort, a wide array of very nasty and unfavorable things. Now, we can rule out torture, because I am not very knowledgeable, and you would have a hard time convincing anyone that knows me, even slightly otherwise. Mutilation naturally exits with torture as well, so that leaves sacrifice and possession, both of which require rituals. So, they intend to kidnap me and involve me in some ritual, he said, nodding his head as he finished. Vern looked at him with appraisal. That was a reasonable assessment. Well, I'm a reasonable man, of course, said Adeline, entirely serious, causing Vern to furrow his eyebrows at him. Now, as to the connection with House Larian, I'm still not entirely sure, but I can't assume that because I have proven so evasive, and because they did not want to directly involve the Black Eyes in the city, as that would likely end in disaster for them on account of such brave, stalwart, and noble men such as yourself, their plan is to instead cause such a commotion that they can easily take me under cover of chaos. Well, the answer seems obvious to me then, said Vern. I have connections. I can get you back to the city proper and have you avoid the flood. It's not as if they can risk triggering floods indefinitely upon each of one of your shore terms. That would give us time to launch an official investigation as well and finally put all of this to an end. An end. Things were coming together quite nicely. He'd be gone from this hell of a country and on to better things. He could recall tales of the world from his not-quite-a-brother, vivid descriptions of the Festival of Grace, which his mother had attended, the multicolored fireworks brightening the gloom with a luminescence that was captured and held by the spires of Hindestin. She had wanted to see more, but had never had the chance to. So, why not him? Why shouldn't he do it for her? Someone sat to his left, and he turned his head, his face going blank as he recognized the man. My Lord Blanost, said the man with the nasal voice, you cannot leave us, so... Adeline drew a dagger from his belt and rammed it into the man's throat with such force he fell over the man, their bodies falling to the ground. Adeline sat atop the man's chest and lid closed as the blood gurgled and spattered his face. I told you I would send you to your lord screaming. Remember? And as the light left the man's beady little eyes, he smiled